Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to part two of my interview with Rohit Choudhary, founder and CEO of Acceldata. Rohit, welcome back to the interview.
Yeah, thanks, Mark.
In part one, we were talking about how models can drift, that decay can creep into the model landscape, and how Acceldata can address that. If you're viewing us here in part two and you happen to miss that part one, I would encourage you to go back and pick up some great insights from Rohit. But today we're going to pick up with the idea of AI for automation and efficiency in data operations. So we're turning our attention to looking at data ops and how AI can be helpful there, and also how that infusion of AI into observability has changed the game for how this function can be done. So, with the opening question I'd like you to address, Rohit, is how is AI transforming data operations in terms of automation and efficiency? Let's just start there.
I think it is going to have a huge effect. In the last 5 years, like we were discussing even in part one, that we reduced, 35% of, storage. I think those outcomes are going to continue to repeat. What we saw in one of the customers, a massive CPG customer in the world-renowned brand, they were able to reduce about 10% of their cloud data warehousing costs by just monitoring the replicated queries that they had. And what we did was that we ended up finding the patterns in which their users were interacting with the database. And we found out that they were actually creating duplicate data sets. And by just identifying, some of those interesting patterns and informing them in time, they were able to take action on it. Now, very similar, we've seen that, there is over provisioning of, container sizes as an example, because containers have become almost like the fundamental compute units, both on the cloud and on premise. And sometimes, people are very defensive and they over, provision. They give it more capacity than what is required. But on the cloud, it becomes extremely expensive all of a sudden. So it is possible to, return up to 20 to 25% of memory and, up to 50% of, overall compute power, which is, very, very common and what we see in scenarios. Now, the reason that all of this will undergo massive transformation and automation from a data operations perspective is obviously because the data infrastructure is way larger than the application infrastructure today. And therefore, the potentials of making mistakes and having, large bills come up at your doorstep very frequently is very high. Now, as the data landscape increases, you cannot monitor every new process, every new report, and every new model that gets deployed. So it has to have a system. Now, that system also cannot be static, which is that, the thresholds of alerting need to, adjust with the recency, seasonality, and the amount of people that are interacting with your system. But it also has to be, it cannot be just for cost-saving purposes. It also has to serve the core of the business. So I think when you put in all of these factors and consider these are the features of, monitoring the infrastructure itself, then obviously, it has to be an AI first, world, which then can be implemented only using data observability. So we're pretty excited about, this space. The final thing I would say is that there are just too many alerting systems today that enterprises are being used to. And what ends up happening when you get too many alerts, you get alert fatigue. So discriminating between what is an alert that deserves the attention of the data team versus discriminating, against the alerts that deserve any attention is equally important. Having that discrimination that, this is important, this is not, is super important to reduce the amount of operational noise that data teams are getting exposed to. So that's another area that we are super excited about. And the final thing is when you get an alert, earlier you would just get the address of the rabbit hole and you can keep going down as much as possible in that rabbit hole. But now the alert actually comes with the address of, here is the RCA and this is the context, this is what we saw. And these are the two most likely outcomes or reasons for which, this alert was raised. So I think this is massively transformational.
Yeah, I think you kind of answered the next question that I was going to ask, which had to do with how these automations can help the human factor side of the equation, the data engineers and the data scientists, and some of it is found in this uh, 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 deduplicating or sort of reducing the noise factor in the alerts that come out. Also, as you just mentioned, including root cause suggestions in the signals that do flow through out to the human side of things for for resolution. But are there other aspects of the work that really kind of focus on helping the scientists, the data scientists, and the ML engineers with their workload?
I think everybody is struggling through these issues because, if you think of it, the most important and the critical resources are these top people who have the capability of building something new, building and bringing innovation to the enterprise. And you don't want them to spend 50% or more of their time in just debugging day-to-day issues. If the model has a decay, they should already know they should have the capability to implement detective and preventive controls so that they are getting informed ahead of time before they are spending a lot of time back. So if they get information before the fact, they can potentially, have an influence or take action so that they're not actually looking at poor outcomes and therefore they're saving time. So instead of them saving spending all their time on debugging the problems, you'd rather have them build new machine learning models, support new lines of businesses, and build new revenue generating use cases. And that's where the data scientists and the engineers and everybody else should be spending their time, not on the operational side of the world.
Mm, very, very good insight. So let's kind of switch gears here and think about the future. I'd like to ask you a few forward-looking questions. The full disclosure, it has nothing to do with the stock valuation or whether or not you should invest in Excel data. These are just kind of prognostications for what you see as an expert within the industry. What future trends do you see in AI and data observability that enterprises should be preparing themselves for?
I think AI is going to be very pervasive. I think you cannot skip the AI line. I think at some point in time, all enterprises will start deploying mainstream valuable use cases through AI. Um, there is going to be clearly a division between companies who get AI right and companies who don't get AI right. And I think the capital markets, consumers, supply chains will respect the companies that actually got AI right. And I think as companies start thinking about the future, I think data observability becomes one of the most important layers that you want to embed into your data ecosystem as quickly as possible, because it brings you in control of all the things that you're going to deploy in the next 5 years, but also in the next decade or so. So I think, data observability almost becomes like the precursor step before you actually start thinking about AI at scale. And certainly, improving your own current day-to-day problems, which is data analytics and machine learning models, improving the quality of that is also going to be a very strong precursor of, a very successfully run AI program.
Yeah, that's it's fascinating. I think you're speaking to the exact problem or challenge that organizations face, and this interview is being run in CDO magazine. Our community is largely senior data and analytics leaders who read and listen to our interviews. I've been in this field of data analytics for some number of decades. I actually would suggest the truth be that I've been in it for a couple centuries now, and started in the last century, and I'm here in the next century. But we still have struggled with this idea of the importance of curation of our enterprise data assets, proactively investing in managing the quality so that we can trust the usability of those assets where needed, when needed, and in the form needed. And AI and Gen AI in particular has cast a really big magnifying glass on to your quote in part one, the creation of dangerous outputs if we don't get the data inputs right, if we don't curate our data, if we don't integrate it in appropriate ways, and if we don't do that at scale, because the sources and the diversity and the variety of data fueling these use cases now for Gen AI is so pervasive, we can't control it. And so observability and automation and AI for the purposes of managing data and curating it are, to your point, becoming table stakes. And as you think about that, as a leader of an organization that is engineering platforms to help solve for some of these problems, what are you doing? What is your engineering R&D team doing in the product set to bring some of these features and capabilities to market?
Absolutely. I'll answer it outside in and then I'll answer it inside out. I think, one of the big changes that we are seeing is that there was like a massive separation, to your point, which you made, an excellent point, that people have been trying to get ahead of the data quality problem for a very, very long time. The division that we typically see, and this is the outside-in view that I want to share. The division that we are seeing is that the data governance office and the platform engineering and data engineering, they still are unable to see eye to eye on the topic of data quality. And the reason is that the data governance officers, or the data governance office in general, is looking at data from only a compliance and auditability perspective. The data engineering team, on the other hand, is responding and reacting to the expectations of the auditability and the compliance reasons. But they have bigger problems, and the bigger problems are that the number of operational issues that they are encountering, they actually increase or make the problem of the governance officers multifold, because there's not sufficient lineage, there's not sufficient impact analysis, and there's not sufficient information about what the sources of data are, especially in a multi-technology and a multi-cloud world. Data observability is actually, merging these two worlds. It's giving the tools where these two different groups, the business, the data governance office, and the data engineering, can see at the whole world operationally. That they're able to see that, operations and day-to-day operations actually change the world a lot more than, doing a once-a-year audit. And unless you actually fix your everyday routine, it's difficult to say what will be the outcome at the end of the year when the audit happens. In terms of what our own engineering is doing to sort of bring these two personas and these two worlds closer together, is actually building this massively important metadata repository, right, which is net the end all of everything, which I described probably in part one in a little bit of less detail, but let me describe it. We have the access to the SQLs that people are firing, the models that data scientists are running, and the data access or the data assets there that they access, the cost that it brings onto the enterprise to run a particular query or a particular model. In addition to that, we have the information about all the metadata, the SQLs, the stored procedures, and everything else that comes along with it. And what ends up happening is that this is like a massive feature set of the operational state of the data landscape. And when you put that into the models that we apply to, we actually come back and tell you what are the most important assets and that you should be paying attention to. Here are the data quality rules that you should go and automatically apply, because we've created our own generative AI capability which allow you to write the rules, not even write the rules, but literally just approve the rules that we have already generated for you. And we then go and find out all the alerts and put all the context that we've learned from the system so that you get to your RCS really quickly. All of this has been like exciting work. We've just inverted the problem. And I was just reflecting on when you were saying that you're in the second century of data and analytics, and yet data quality is an unsolved problem. It's because we did not have the right tool sets.
Right.
That nobody wanted to take on this problem, but now it's possible with the advent of this transformative technology.
Yeah, I can tell that you're enjoying the journey of leading the charge to build some of these transformative capabilities. The energy that you show in exploring these topics with us is fascinating. So I appreciate that. As we begin to wrap this interview, is there any final kind of comments you would like to make as you think about the future, or anything that you would want to share with our listeners before we wrap?
I think, one of the things that just fascinated and sort of, intrigued me as I was thinking about, what our company is able to do in terms of what are the real use cases that we're affecting. And I was thinking about the following use cases: that when milk products hit the shelf in several retailers in the world, they are also using data observability to make sure that the number of boxes that hit the shelf, they are accurate. When people are using ink in their houses, in their printers, we actually figure out when is the right time to send that ink to someone, so that they can keep printing. When somebody is getting a mortgage or a short-term loan, we also play a part in that because we're validating the credit scores of the people. So it's very fascinating for me to figure out, the number of use cases in which we're actually touching, real-time use cases which affect people. And I think, as more data leaders start thinking about the use cases that they can apply this problem to, which is, whether it's risk and analytics, risk in the case of banking, whether it is, EMR record verification in healthcare, verifying, the payer information, doing financial reconciliation between CRM systems, operational data stores, and analytics, data observability can be applied to a variety of these use cases because we don't differentiate in what kind of use cases you have.
Yeah, I
Um,
think you're saying something that is sort of an epiphanal moment for me to think about observability in its own right, not as necessarily just a tool, an automation, a use case for AI to help improve the reliability of data, but as and almost as an application in its own right to solve use cases or business problems that sit in the ecosystem where I'm thinking about, for example, a one of my clients is Kroger, grocery store chain, and it's important in the front end to observe the patterns of traffic coming to the check stands, those that are using the self checkouts, and those that are going to the checker lines, and how those queues build over the day, over the hours of the day of the week, the weeks of the month, the months of the year. That's all an observability exercise, isn't it? To use video analytics to observe, learn from, and then predict and respond proactively. And that's really an observability use case. That system solution is the implementation of observability, and embedding AI in that system solution creates a better outcome, assuming the data that's gathered and the observations that are collected are analyzed using predictive models that are created with accurate data to begin with. I think you're just scratching the surface of the opportunity.
I think so too. I think, businesses will have better outcomes when you actually put, observability across your supply chains, observability across your financial data supply chains, and also your consumer data supply chains, because all of these data supply chains come together to better business outcomes. And if you start observing all of this, it becomes like a tremendous, a force multiplier for awesome business outcomes.
Yeah. Well, I think we're out of time. So we're going to have to wrap the interview part two. I would love to have you come back and sit with us for another segment to kind of riff on these ideas of this kind of new category of application that exists out there. Maybe it becomes as significant as the ERP is in many ways, but for different reasons. So if you're open to that idea, we'll figure out how to get you back on the interview calendar and back in front of the listeners. Rohit, thank you so much for the time that you spent with us today. CDO Magazine appreciates folks like yourself out there making an impact in the space that we try to have a voice and give voice to the people like yourself who are having that impact around data and analytics. We believe data drives digital, and digital transforms the world. So I'm appreciative of these conversations always. You guys have been listening to Rohit Choudhary, who is the founder and CEO of Acceldata. If you'd like to learn more about Acceldata, Rohit, how can folks get more information about what you do and how to access what it is?
So I'm, obviously we have a ton of resources on acceldata.io, and I'm personally reachable as RC Online on LinkedIn and RC Online on Twitter as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me today.
See you.